Slavoj, ŽIŽEK, the Parallax view.
Heard all.
Two remarkable stories were reported in the media in 2003. A Spanish art historian uncovered the first use of modern art as a deliberate form of torture. Kandinsky and Klee, as well as Buñuel and Dali, were the inspiration behind a series of secret cells and torture centers built in Barcelona in 1938, the work of a French anarchist, Alphonse Lorentzic, a Slovene family name, who invented a form of psychotechnic torture. He creates his so-called colored cells as a contribution to the fight against Franco's forces. The cells were as inspired by ideas of geometric abstraction and surrealism as they were by avant-garde theories on the psychological properties of colors. Beds were placed at a 20-degree angle, making them near impossible to sleep on, and the floors of the 6-foot by 3-foot cells were strewn with bricks and other geometric blocks to prevent the prisoners from walking backward and forward.
The door enigma.
The only option left to them was staring at the walls, which were curved and covered with mind-altering patterns of cubes, squares, straight lines, and spirals, which utilized tricks of color, perspective, and scale to cause mental confusion and distress. Lighting effects gave the impression that the dizzying patterns on the wall were moving. Lorenzi preferred to use the color green because, according to his theory of the psychological effects of various colors, it produced melancholy and sadness. The second story, Walter Benjamin did not kill himself in a Spanish border village in 1940 out of fear that he would be returned to France and thus to Nazi agents. He was killed there by Stalin's agents. A few months before he died, Benjamin wrote a thesis on the philosophy of history, his short but devastating analysis of the failure of Marxism. He died at a time when many former Soviet loyalists were becoming disillusioned with Moscow because of the Hitler-Stalin pact.
Pass.
In response, one of the Killerati Stalinist agents recruited from socialist intellectuals who were carrying out assassinations killed him. The ultimate cause of his murder was that as Benjamin fled through the mountains from France toward Spain, he was hugging a manuscript, the masterwork on which he had been working in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, the elaboration of the theses. The briefcase containing this manuscript was entrusted to a fellow refugee who conveniently lost it on a train from Barcelona to Madrid. In short, Stalin read Benjamin's theses. He knew about the new book project based on the theses, and he wanted to prevent its publication at any cost. What these two stories share is not just a surprising link between high culture, fine art, and theory, and base, brutal politics, murder, torture. At this level, the link is not even as unexpected as it may appear. Is it not one of the most vulgar common sense opinions that viewing abstract art, like listening to atonal music, is torture? Along the same lines, we can easily envisage a prison in which the detainees are exposed constantly to atonal music. On the other hand, the deeper common sense is that Schoenberg, in his music, expressed the horrors of Holocaust and mass bombings before they actually occurred. More radically, what the two stories share is that the link they establish is an impossible short circuit of levels, which, for structural reasons, can never meet. It is simply not possible, say, for what Stalin stands for to move at the same level as Benjamin, that is, to grasp the true dimensions of Benjamin's theses from a Stalinist perspective. The illusion on which these two stories rely, that of putting two incompatible phenomena on the same level, is strictly analogous to what Kant called transcendental illusion. The illusion of being able to use the same language for phenomena which are mutually untranslatable and can be grasped only in a kind of parallax view, constantly shifting perspective between 2 points between which no synthesis or mediation is possible. Thus, there is no rapport between the two levels, no shared space, although they are closely connected, even identical in a way. They are, as it were, on the opposite side of a Mobius strip. The encounter between Leninist politics and modernist art, exemplified in the fantasy of Lenin meeting Dadaists in the cabaret Voltaire and ŽIŽEK, cannot structurally take place. More radically, revolutionary politics and revolutionary art move in different temporalities. Although they are linked, they are two sides of the same phenomenon which, precisely as two sides, can never meet. There is more than a historical accident in the fact that, in matters of culture, Leninists admired great classic art, while many modernists were political conservatives, proto-fascists even. Is this not already the lesson of the link between the French Revolution and German idealism? Although they are two sides of the same historical moment, they could not directly meet. That is to say, German idealism could emerge only in the backward conditions of a Germany where no political revolution occurred. In short, what both these anecdotes share is the occurrence of an insurmountable parallax gap. The confrontation of two closely linked perspectives between which no neutral common ground is possible. In the first approach, such a notion of parallax gap cannot but appear as a kind of Kantian revenge over Hegel. Is not parallax yet another name for a fundamental antinomy, which can never be dialectically mediated, sublated into a higher synthesis, since there is no common language, no shared ground between the two levels? It is a wager of this book that, far from posing an irreducible obstacle to dialectics, the notion of the parallax gap provides the key which enables us to discern its subversive core. To theorize this parallax gap properly was the necessary first step in the rehabilitation of the philosophy of dialectical materialism. Here we encounter a basic paradox. While many of today's sciences spontaneously practice materialist dialectic, philosophically they oscillate between mechanical materialism and idealist obscurantism. There is no space for compromise here, no dialogue, no search for allies in difficult times. Today, in an epoch of the temporary retreat of the dialectical materialism, Lenin's strategic insight is crucial. When an army is in retreat, 100 times more discipline is required than when the army is advancing. When a Menshevik says,
Bonjour, ici Mélanie Tremblay et bienvenue à la machine à écrire. Êtes-vous familier avec l'analyse logique? Il s'agit en fait de donner une identité à des portions de phrases. La connaissance de l'analyse logique permet au rédacteur d'améliorer la syntaxe et le style du texte. Dans cette première leçon sur l'analyse logique, Nous apprendrons à reconnaître la proposition indépendante. Mais qu'est-ce qu'une proposition, direz-vous? À ne pas confondre avec la préposition.
Where are we
La
at? Oh, you
proposition
strip
est
down,
une
down,
phrase
down.
ou un segment de
Menshevik,
phrase
you are
ou
now
un verbe
retreating.
conjugué.
I have been
Il est très
advocating
important que le
retreat
verbe
all
soit
the time.
conjugué pour
I
qu'il
agree
y ait
with you.
une
I am your
proposition.
man. Let us
Ce qui
retreat
signifie
together.
que les verbes à
We say in
l'infinitif
reply.
qui se
For
terminent
public
en
manifestation of Menshevism, our revolutionary
ER
courts must
et
pass
RE
the death
sont
sentence. Otherwise, they are
Pour bien
not
comprendre,
our courts,
observons la phrase
but God
suivante.
knows what.
Mon chien dort
Today's
sur le
crisis
sofa.
of Marxism is
Cette
not
phrase
due only to
comprend
the
un verbe
socio-political
conjugué,
defeats
le
of
verbe
Marxist
dort.
movements
Dès qu'il y a un verbe
at an
conjugué,
inherent
il y a une suite.
theoretical level.
Dans cette phrase,
The crisis
dès qu'il y a
can and
un
should
verbe
also be
conjugué,
indexed
il n'y a
through the
qu'une
decline, virtual
proposition.
disappearance,
On dit
even,
qu'il s'agit
of
d'une
dialectical
proposition indépendante.
materialism as the philosophical
Pour
underpinning
identifier
of
la
Marxism.
proposition, il faut
Dialectical
d'abord et avant tout
materialism,
identifier
not the much
le
more
verbe
acceptable
conjugué.
and much less
Prenez la peine
embarrassing
d'accepter
materialist
le verbe conjugué dans
dialectic,
la phrase.
the shift from
Dans la
determinate
phrase
reflection to
suivante, tu
reflective
conduiras
determination
la
is
voiture
crucial
de
here.
Marie.
This
Quel
is
est le
another
verbe
case
conjugué?
where
Le
word
verbe
or
est
the position of
conduira.
words decides everything.
Prenons cette clause.
The shift we're
Tu
dealing with
conduiras
here
la
is the
voiture
key
de Marie.
dialectical
C'est
shift,
une proposition
the one which is most
indépendante,
difficult to
puisqu'il n'y a
grasp
qu'un
for
seul verbe
negative
conjugué.
dialectics in love with
Dans les phrases
explosions of
simples, les
negativity,
propositions
with
indépendantes
all
sont facilement
imaginable
identifiables.
forms of
Il est
resistance
étonnant
and
qu'une
subversion,
personne rédige un
but
texte
unable to overcome
exclusivement
its
avec
own
des phrases simples,
parasitizing on the
c'est-à-dire
preceding
avec un
positive
seul
order,
verbe
from the
conjugué.
wild dance of the
Par
liberation
exemple,
from the
j'aime
oppressive
les
system
rayons
to
du
what
soleil
German
et réchauffe
idealists
ma peau.
called the system
Dans
of
cette
liberty.
phrase,
Two
identifiez les verbes
examples from
conjugués.
revolutionary politics should
Les
suffice
verbes
here.
sont être,
It is easy to fall in love
dans
with
ce
the
temps,
multitude of free
réchauffe.
thinkers who blossomed in the pre-revolutionary
Vous
France of the
remarquez que
late
dans cette
18th
phrase,
century,
il y a
from
deux verbes
libertarians debating in the salons,
Souvenez-vous que
enjoying the
dès qu'il y a un
paradoxes
verbe
of their own
conjugué dans cette phrase,
inconsistencies, to
il y a
pathetic artists using
dans cette
those
phrase,
in
il y a
power
donc
with their own
deux
protests
propositions.
against power.
Comme elles sont
It is
jointes
much
par
more
une virgule,
difficult fully to
ce sont
endorse the
deux
reversal of this
propositions
unrest into the harsh new order of the
juxtaposées.
revolutionary terror.
Dès qu'il y a un signe de
Similarly,
ponctuation autre
it
que
is
le
easy
point,
to fall in
les
love with the
propositions
crazy
sont
creative unrest of the
juxtaposées.
first years after the October Revolution,
Vous savez,
with
mon père a été président de votre
suprematists,
association pendant de nombreuses
futurists,
années.
constructivists, and so on,
Identifiez
competing
les
for
verbes
primacy and revolutionary fervor.
Les verbes sont
It is
savez,
much more difficult to recognize in the horrors of the forced collectivization of the late 1920s, the attempt to translate this revolutionary fervor into a new positive social order. But there is nothing ethically more disgusting than revolutionary beautiful souls who refuse to recognize, in the cross of the post-revolutionary present, the truth of their own flowering dreams about freedom. That, philosophically speaking, Stalinist dialectical materialism is imbecility incarnate. It is not so much beyond the point as rather the point itself, since my point is precisely to conceive the identity of my Hegelian Lacanian position and the philosophy of dialectical materialism as a Hegelian infinite judgment, that is, as the speculative identity of the highest and lowest, and like the formula of phrenology, the spirit is a bone. In what, then, does the difference between the highest and the lowest reading of dialectical materialism consist? The steely fourth teacher committed a serious philosophical error when he ontologized the difference between dialectical and historical materialism, conceiving it as the difference between metaphysica universalis and metaphysica specialis, universal ontology, and its application to the special domain of society. All we have to do here in order to pass from the lowest to the highest is to displace this difference between the universal and the particular into the particular itself. Dialectical materialism provides another view on humanity itself, different from historical materialism. Yes, once again, the relationship between historical and dialectical materialism is that of parallax. They are substantially the same. The shift from the one to the other is purely a shift of perspective. It introduces topics like the death drive, the inhuman core of the human, which reach over the horizon of the collective praxis of humanity, The gap is thus asserted as inherent to humanity itself, as the gap between humanity and its own inhuman excess. There is a structural analogy between this relationship between historical and dialectical materialism and the properly psychoanalytic reply that a boring standard criticism of the application of psychoanalysis to social ideological processes. Is it, page 5?